What is up, my dudes? This is Ozzy from Versus.com, and what I have for you here is the Oppo Find X3 Pro. Kind of a newcomer trying to make a name for itself when you take into account all the greats, but you might be surprised. The Oppo Find X3 Pro is packing a 50-megapixel Sony IMX766 for its main sensor, and the same goes for its ultra-wide camera. This sensor was made specifically for Oppo, so I'm curious to see what it brings to the table. The iPhone 13 Pro Max, on the other hand, has the same camera specs as the 13 Pro, with a 12-megapixel main and ultra-wide sensor. Don't let the numbers fool you though, as Apple has always stood out with its software rather than its megapixels. We've drawn up 10 categories to see how each device's cameras measure up against the others when their software and cameras are taken into account. Let's jump right into it and let the facts speak. I think we're all familiar by now how the iPhone is just extremely good in portrait mode. There just aren't any errors to talk about except for the odd blur near the hair or the software being unable to decipher a stray leaf from a tree. Other than that, the images are usually crystal clear and crisp. What I'm liking here is that the Oppo has done a decent job as well. The bokeh effect could be tuned a little bit perhaps, because I find that in some parts of the photos, the blur is much more intense than others. In fact, the Oppo looks a lot better when the lighting is blue, which obviously won't happen often, but imagine if you're at a nightclub or maybe at a bar with a lot of lights. In that situation, the Oppo could actually give you some good results in unexpected conditions. However, the difference is even more visible when outdoors. The iPhone manages to pull the attention to the subject rather than getting distracted by the branches and leaves in the background, which does happen with the Oppo. All in all, a general evaluation will push my preference towards the iPhone, simply because of the more consistent bokeh and detail in the photos. Those details carry on to the standard camera comparison, where we see the signature sharpness of the iPhone, spreading that detail around and allowing you to focus straight on the subject. The Oppo has more of a painting kind of look, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this in a negative way. What I mean to say is that there's more of a picture look than a photo. Do you get what I mean? It looks a bit blended together, whereas the iPhone makes it easier to differentiate between all the different colors and objects with their signature sharpness. But of course, different software works in different ways, and I wouldn't necessarily call this a disadvantage or something to criticize the Oppo with. It isn't bad, it's just different. And same with the portrait mode, it just does such a good job with the blue light that I don't know why exactly it's that good. Unfortunately, it's not a common situation to be in, so even though it is a positive for the Oppo, it's not something that blows me out of the water. Overall, I'm gonna call this one a stalemate, along with something else that both phones are pretty much on the same level, the zoom. Not something we see too often. The quality definitely differs even when going from 2x digital to 3x optical, especially on the iPhone, so pay close attention and you'll be wondering what's going on. The one thing that I'm pretty sure everyone saw from a mile away is that the iPhone would retain its sharpening habit and focus on details with a bit of a dull color scheme, while the Oppo would opt to go with less small details, livelier colors, and a natural look. While I am attracted to the details on the iPhone, the 2x just falls really short, as well as 10x and max zoom, bringing out the renowned watercolor painting effect. The Oppo does have some pixelation and graininess because of its lack of sharpening, so it isn't doing the best either, which leaves us with a pretty equal standard, so I'm quite unwilling to budge on this section. We'll call it a draw. But what about the autofocus? I can just see y'all rolling your eyes because the iPhone is always one step ahead when it comes to autofocus. Interestingly enough, I was surprised to see that the Oppo software was able to match the speed of Apple, and there's a very minor difference in the way of Apple when the change in brightness and shadows is taken into account. Even though the iPhone manages to impress as always, its opposition is not doing too shabby, so I'd say this is somewhere in the middle.
Yo, my dudes, it's really cold out here.
Do you know where this is? This is actually the roof of our office building,
Where in the summertime, people come up here to have drinks and sometimes make a barbecue.
So what am I doing up here in this weather?
Well, the roof is perfect for making outdoor audio tests.
What do you guys think?
Is the wind blurring out the sound too much?
You should definitely check it out and let us know. I think the winner of this section though is gonna be the wind, because Christ, that was loud. I'm not sure and I might be wrong, but I'm feeling a little noise reduction on the Oppo, which doesn't seem to be working as intended. Either way, neither microphone put up a performance that would overshadow the other, so this one will be a draw. Speaking of which, this is the most identical thing I've ever seen. I'm talking about the slow motion. I mean, it's always pretty similar with these big brands because the slow-mo isn't paid much attention to. but sometimes one can record with higher FPS or resolution, and for the most part, that's enough to get the advantage when you're doing a one-on-one comparison. Here though, aside from the cooler colors of Apple and the warmer colors of Oppo, there's literally no difference at all. Moving on, macro is one of my favorites these days. We're often out and about in the forests of Berlin, and the more nice sights you see, the more you want to look around and take some pictures. I actually like the macro mode on the Oppo, as quite a few bigger and more popular brands don't have this quality and the ability to get up this close. The only issue is that the iPhone's macro is just insane. Being able to get up to 2 centimeters close and still retain top tier quality is a blessing for those who are often looking for fancy shots and close-ups in nature. There's no doubt that this point is gonna be chalked up to Apple with respect to its new macro mode. It's been a pretty close competition so far, and there's still something interesting to talk about. The issue is, I've no idea what Oppo tried to do with their stabilization mode. They have something called the Ultra mode and another thing called the Ultra Pro. So normally this wouldn't be that surprising, as some phones do have more than one stabilization mode. For example, the new Google Pixel 6. But the problem I'm having with the Oppo is that the Ultra mode doesn't seem to do anything. And what makes it even worse is that the quality is only HD. Yeah, it's just 1080p, while the iPhone stabilization is embedded in the software, so even though it's not the best, it's still 4K. While running, pretty much every phone that has a dedicated stabilization mode performs better than the iPhone, so that's not a surprise at all. During this part, you're seeing the Ultra Pro mode of the stabilization, but the HD quality and the Ultra mode not performing adequately is quite a disappointment, so even though this is the weakest point of the iPhone, the Oppo will not be able to come out on top. Thankfully for the general videos though, the quality does increase. There's always going to be a preference whether you like brighter or darker, sharper or softer, but both are good enough to pass the bar. Last but not least, pictures and videos taken at night. It's always a big issue since technology has only gone so far, and the software has to do most of the work to try to portray these pictures in an acceptable fashion. That being said, I am kind of impressed. You see, pictures taken at night in the past would either be extremely dark or with a ton of noise because the software would just often try to turn up the brightness to shine some light on the photo. Now, it's a lot different. Obviously, there are still some issues to iron out, but I do believe that phones are going in the right direction. We'll give you a couple of examples of what the street actually looked like to the naked eye, and then we'll see the results of the processing. As it usually is with night photos, you really wouldn't be able to tell which photo was taken by which phone because the traits do not stay the same. On some, the Oppo has a yellow, almost orange tint, while the iPhone deciphers the colors quite accurately. But on others, the Oppo has near perfect sharpening and detail, while the iPhone is too soft and even looks blurry when you crop in certain parts of the photo. The only time there's a drastic difference though is when the front camera is taken into consideration and the Oppo's photos just look washed. The selfies are colorless, they're bland, so late night party photos are out of the question. And lastly, the video of the Oppo does look more natural, but in some situations it's just so dark that it's hard to see the details and to ignore the noise. There's a lot of software illumination and noise on the iPhone as well, so I wouldn't necessarily praise the performance of these phones when it comes down to late night videos. Close calls all around, and the iPhone comes out on top with 6 out of the 10 points. Do keep in mind though that some modes and aspects are more important than others, and you'll need to decide which ones you care about more. Also, there's obviously going to be other things you're looking at when you're buying a phone, but in general, I'd say both have pretty good cameras, but the software of the iPhone is just a bit better overall. Drop a like and sub to the channel if you enjoyed this video, because if you do, we're gonna keep them coming. Take care and see you next time.